The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into my wrists as Sheriff Sheila smirked down at me. Blood trickled from my split lip onto the cracked pavement of Main Street. Two of her deputies held me against my truck while curious onlookers gathered, their expressions a mix of fear and pity. "Resisting a lawful inspection," she announced loudly, her voice carrying across the stunned crowd. "Unlicensed power generation, endangering public safety." I struggled to find my voice. "You know damn well my permits are valid. This is about your brother's company." Her eyes narrowed to slits. She leaned in close, her badge gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Big mistake bringing family into this," she whispered, her breath hot against my ear. "When I am done with you, nobody in this county will remember your name." As they dragged me toward the patrol car, I caught sight of my generator yard in the distance, padlocked, condemned with official notices. The lifeline for half the businesses in town, suddenly declared illegal. That was the moment I realized this was never about safety regulations. This was about power, and not the electrical kind. 5 months earlier, my life had been as steady as the hum of my generators. Rose Creek was not a place that attracted attention. Our town sat nestled between rolling hills and sprawling farmland, far enough from the city that we rarely made the news. The power grid that served us was older than most of the residents, failing predictably with every storm or cold snap. I never set out to become the backup power source for half the town. It started small with my own farm. After losing a season's worth of refrigerated produce during a 3-day outage, I invested in a hybrid system, solar panels that fed into battery storage, with diesel generators as backup. The setup was efficient, clean, and powerful enough to keep my entire operation running when the grid went down. Word spread. First, it was just my neighbor Ted, whose wife needed an oxygen machine. Then the Parkside Diner asked if they could run a line when the power went out, to keep their freezers from spoiling thousands of dollars in food. Before long, I had a small network, all legal, all permitted, all inspected regularly by the county. During outages, my place became an island of light in the darkness. People would bring their phones to charge, store medications that needed refrigeration, or just come for hot coffee and company. I charged enough to cover costs, never looking to profit. It was about community, about filling a need. "You are like our personal power plant," Martha from the diner told me one evening as she collected her charged battery pack. "Reliable, honest, no unexplained surges or fees." I had noticed the bills from Langston Energy had been climbing steadily, with infrastructure maintenance charges that never seemed to improve service. Still, I minded my business and kept my generators humming. The troubles began when Sheriff Sheila Langston took office. She replaced Sheriff Miller, who had retired after 30 years of reasonable, measured law enforcement. The election had been quiet, with Sheila running unopposed after the other candidate mysteriously withdrew. Within weeks, there was a new feeling in Rose Creek, a tightness, a wariness. "She is writing tickets for things nobody knew were violations," Ted told me one morning, holding a citation for improper mailbox height. Apparently his was 2 inches too low. "It is like she has memorized every obscure ordinance just to catch us out." I paid little attention at first. I followed the rules, kept my permits updated, and maintained my equipment with obsessive care. My system was clean, quiet, and professionally installed. I had nothing to worry about. Until the morning she appeared at my gate. I was checking the solar array when I heard vehicles approaching. 3 patrol cars rolled up my driveway, dust billowing behind them. Sheriff Sheila stepped out of the lead vehicle, sunglasses hiding her eyes, her uniform pressed to military precision. 2 deputies flanked her, hands resting casually on their holstered weapons. "Mr. Harrison," she called out, not bothering to approach closer, "we have received complaints about your operation here." I climbed down from my inspection platform. "Complaints from whom?" "That information is confidential." She removed her sunglasses, revealing cold blue eyes that assessed my property with calculated interest. "You are running quite the power station here. Do you have permits for all this equipment?" There it was, that tone, not inquiring but accusing, assuming guilt before asking questions. Yes, ma'am, everything is fully permitted and inspected. I kept my voice level. I can show you the documentation. Please do. Her smile did not reach her eyes. I led them to my office, a converted shipping container with all my paperwork organized in labeled folders. As I pulled out the permits, I noticed her deputies were not beside her anymore. Through the window, I could see them examining my generators, taking photographs. These permits are for residential backup power, she said, flipping through the pages. Not commercial distribution. I have provisional commercial permits as well. I pulled another folder. Approved during last year's winter emergency and renewed quarterly. The county classified it as essential service after the ice storm. Something flickered across her face, surprise, quickly masked by stern authority. These will need to be verified, and there are new regulations about noise and emissions you may not be in compliance with. As she spoke, I felt a growing certainty that something was wrong. Very wrong. Sheriff Sheila was not here out of concern for regulations. Her interest in my operation went deeper than that. Everything here exceeds state environmental guidelines, I said. The solar array handles most of the load. The generators are just backup. We will see about that. She handed the folders to one of her deputies who had returned. Consider this an official notification that your operation is under review. I suggest you suspend any power provision until our investigation is complete. That would leave businesses and homes vulnerable during outages. Her expression hardened. Then I suggest they make alternative arrangements. Good day, Mr. Harrison. As their patrol cars disappeared down my driveway, the dust settling in their wake, an uncomfortable realization settled in my stomach. Sheriff Sheila had not come here to enforce the law. She had come looking for a violation, and if she could not find one, I suspected she would create one. My quiet life was about to become very complicated. The official warning arrived 3 days later, printed on county letterhead and affixed to my generator housing with alarming finality. Notice of violation, unauthorized commercial power generation. The document listed 6 alleged infractions, most of which either did not apply to my operation or were covered by my existing permits. I immediately called the county permit office, where I had always maintained good relationships. Susan, who had processed my last renewal, answered with unusual formality. I am sorry, Mr. Harrison, but I cannot discuss your case. Her voice was strained. All inquiries about power generation enforcement must go through the sheriff's office now. Since when? The permit office has always handled this. A pause. There has been a procedural change. I really cannot say more. The line went dead. I stood in my kitchen, the disconnected phone still in my hand, as realization dawned. Sheriff Sheila was not just targeting me, she was changing the rules to do it. That afternoon, I drove to the Parkside Diner to speak with Martha. The lunch crowd had thinned, and she looked relieved to see a friendly face until I mentioned the warning. Oh, James? She glanced around nervously before lowering her voice. The health inspector was here yesterday, said our backup power arrangement might violate code. He never cared before, but suddenly he is talking about revoking our food service license if we do not disconnect from your system. That makes no sense. You need refrigeration to operate safely. I know, Martha's eyes welled with tears. But he said we should contract with Approved Emergency Services, Langston Energy's new backup generator program, triple the cost of what we pay you, and they have not even installed it yet. I cannot afford it, but I cannot afford to lose my license either. The same story repeated across town. The pharmacy, the veterinary clinic, the assisted living center, all had received similar visits, all with the same message. Disconnect from my power or face consequences. By the end of the week, my client list had dwindled from 27 to 3. Only Ted, whose wife's medical needs made him more afraid of power loss than of Sheriff Sheila, and 2 elderly households on the outskirts of town still maintained their connections. I scheduled a meeting with Mayor Patterson, hoping for some clarity or support. His secretary informed me the mayor was indefinitely unavailable to discuss power regulation issues. When I pressed, she whispered, Nobody is crossing the sheriff on this, not after what happened to Commissioner Dawson. Commissioner Dawson had resigned abruptly the previous month, citing personal reasons. No one had seen him in town since. I returned home to find yet another patrol car in my driveway. Deputy Michaels, young and visibly uncomfortable, stood beside my main generator housing. "Sheriff sent me to conduct a surprise inspection," he explained, not meeting my eyes. "Said there was an anonymous noise complaint. The generators are not even running right now." He shrugged apologetically. "Just following orders, sir." The inspection lasted less than 10 minutes. Before leaving, Deputy Michaels produced a heavy padlock and chain. "I have to secure the main distribution panel," he said, his discomfort evident. "Sheriff's orders says it is a public safety measure until the investigation concludes." "That is my private property. You cannot just—" "I can under emergency enforcement provisions," he interrupted, reciting as if from a script. "You can contest it at the hearing." "What hearing? When's?" "Notice will be provided." He secured the lock and handed me a receipt. "I really am sorry, Mr. Harrison." I watched him drive away, anger building in my chest. The padlock gleamed in the afternoon sun, a metal declaration of war. With that single act, Sheriff Sheila had effectively shut down my ability to provide emergency power to anyone. That evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, Ted's truck rumbled up my driveway. His expression was grim as he approached. "They got to you too?" I asked. He nodded. "Two deputies came by, said they would have to condemn my house as unsafe if I did not disconnect from your unauthorized system. My wife cannot go without her oxygen, James. We are moving in with our daughter in Riverside until this blows over." "I understand, Ted. You have to protect your family." After he left, the silence of my farm felt oppressive. The generators that had once provided security and community service stood idle, chained shut by official decree. The solar panels still collected energy, feeding only my immediate needs, their excess potential wasted. It had become painfully clear that this crusade against my operation was not about regulations or safety. Sheriff Sheila was systematically isolating me, cutting me off from the community I had served. What remained unclear was why. What threat did my small operation pose that warranted such focused aggression? What had I done to earn such meticulous attention from the county's top law enforcement officer? I poured myself a whiskey and made a decision. If Sheriff Sheila wanted a fight, I would not go down without understanding why she had targeted me. Something personal drove this vendetta, and I needed to know what it was before she destroyed everything I had built. Morning light streamed through my kitchen window as I sorted through every piece of correspondence I had received from county officials over the past year. Permits, inspections, approvals, all properly filed and granted without issue until Sheriff Sheila's arrival. Nothing in these documents explained her sudden interest in shutting down my operation. I needed information, and for that, I needed to speak with someone who understood how power worked in Rose Creek, both the electrical kind and the political kind. Former Deputy Chief Reynolds had served 30 years in the Sheriff's Department before retiring last spring, shortly after Sheila took office. Local gossip suggested the retirement had not been entirely voluntary. I found him tending his garden behind a modest house on Elm Street. "I wondered when you might come around," he said, not looking up from his tomato plants. "Heard about your trouble. I was hoping you might have some insight." He gestured toward two chairs on his patio. "Not here," he murmured. "Let us take a drive." 20 minutes later, we sat in my truck at the overlook above Taylor's Pond, far from any possible eavesdroppers. Reynolds seemed to relax slightly, though his eyes continuously scanned our surroundings. "First thing you need to understand about Sheriff Sheila," he said finally, "is that she does not enforce laws, she rewrites them to suit her purposes. Cross her and you disappear from public life. Maybe not physically, but effectively. That is what happened to you." A grim nod. "I questioned her methods during her first month. Next day, there was an internal affairs investigation into evidence handling on a 5-year-old case. Complete fabrication, but it was enough to force me into retirement. And Commissioner Dawson found himself facing allegations of financial impropriety. All charges were dropped after he resigned and moved to Arizona. Reynolds turned to face me directly. Listen carefully. Sheila did not rise to power by accident. This was planned, orchestrated. By whom? Follow the money. His voice dropped lower. Who benefits when your generators are shut down, when businesses have no backup during outages? The realization struck like lightning. Langston Energy. Bingo, Reynolds nodded. Owned by Gordon Langston, Sheriff Sheila's brother. The pieces began falling into place. The increased frequency of outages over the past year, the rising rates, the new emergency backup service being marketed to local businesses at premium prices. They are creating the problem and selling the solution, I said. And your independent operation threatens that model. You provide reliability they cannot match at prices they cannot beat. Reynolds checked his watch nervously. There is more. The county commission just approved a 20-year exclusive contract with Langston Energy. No competitive bidding, unanimous vote. That cannot be legal. Legal enough when the sheriff's office investigates anyone who opposes it. He opened the truck door. I have said too much already. One piece of advice: document everything. Every interaction, every notice, every conversation. If you ever hope to fight back, you will need evidence. And if I take this to state authorities? His expression darkened. Local judges are in her pocket. State investigators will not act without substantial proof, and if she catches wind that you are building a case. He left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear. Over the next week, I became a detective in my own life. I installed security cameras around my property. I recorded every phone call. I kept meticulous notes of every interaction with county officials. At the public library, I researched Langston Energy's corporate filings. Gordon Langston had acquired the previously municipal utility through a privatization initiative 3 years earlier. Since then, service quality had declined while rates increased by 38%. The company had recently announced an infrastructure modernization program funded by a county bond issue. I dug deeper, tracking property records and business licenses. 4 members of the county commission had recently formed LLCs that had been awarded subcontracts by Langston Energy. The pieces of corruption were fitting together like a well-designed circuit. My investigation led me to the county records office, where I requested documents related to energy provision permits. The clerk, an older woman named Dorothy, had worked there for decades. Those records have been reclassified, she informed me when I submitted my request. Access now requires approval from the sheriff's department. Since when? New policy as of last month. She glanced around before sliding a note across the counter. Come back at closing. When I returned at 4:55 p.m., Dorothy quickly ushered me into a back room filled with file cabinets. You have 10 minutes, she whispered. There are no cameras in this section. I found what I needed quickly, a complete history of permits issued for power generation in the county. My own permits were there, properly filed and approved. But something else caught my attention. 3 other private power operations had been shut down in the past 6 months, all under similar circumstances to mine. You should also see this, Dorothy said, handing me a thin folder. Inside was a memorandum outlining the new centralized power monitoring initiative, a partnership between the Sheriff's Department and Langston Energy that granted the company exclusive rights to emergency power provision. Can I get copies? Too risky, she checked her watch. But I will leave these out tonight. The security camera in the copy room has been malfunctioning lately. I understood her meaning. That night, with copies of the incriminating documents secured in a waterproof container buried beneath my tool shed, I began to feel the weight of what I had uncovered. This was not just about my generator operation anymore. It was about systematic corruption that affected everyone in Rose Creek. Sheriff Sheila and her brother were not just enforcing monopoly control. They were establishing a power structure that placed them above accountability. My small act of independence threatened their entire scheme. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by evidence of corruption, and realized I had a choice to make. I could walk away, sell my property, start fresh somewhere else. Or I could stand my ground and fight not just for myself, but for everyone being exploited by the Langston siblings. The smart choice was to leave. The right choice was to stay. I chose to stay. Armed with evidence and determination, I contacted the editor of the Rose Creek Gazette, Elaine Peterson. For 30 years, her small newspaper had been the watchdog of local politics. If anyone would have the courage to publish the truth about the Langstons, it would be her. We met at a coffee shop in the next town over. I brought my documents, organized and annotated. Elaine listened intently as I explained the connections between the sheriff, Langston Energy, and the county commission. "This is serious," she said, reviewing the evidence. "Corruption at multiple levels of local government. Will you run the story?" Elaine's expression fell. "I cannot." "Cannot or will not?" "Both." She pushed the documents back toward me. "The Gazette was purchased last month by Valley Media Group. Their first directive was no investigative reporting on local officials without corporate approval. And let me guess, Valley Media Group has connections to Langston Energy." She nodded grimly. "Same parent company. I am sorry, James, I really am. If I run this, I lose my job, and the story never sees print anyway." My next stop was the regional office of the state newspaper. The reporter listened politely before explaining that without official documentation or on-record sources, they could not pursue the story. "Allegations of small-town corruption are common," he explained. "Without smoking gun evidence or a whistleblower willing to go on record, it is just hearsay." Frustrated but undeterred, I returned home to find a fire marshal's vehicle in my driveway. Marshal Jenkins, who had approved my generator setup just months earlier, now looked uncomfortable as he handed me a multi-page violation notice. "New fire code interpretations," he explained weakly. "Your fuel storage does not meet current standards." The standards changed in the last 3 months. He would not meet my eyes, just following directives. The next day brought a zoning officer, citing improper commercial activity in an agricultural zone, despite the fact that my provisional commercial permit explicitly addressed this exception. The day after that, a county environmental inspector claimed my solar array might be causing reflective light pollution, a concept so absurd I would have laughed if the situation were not so serious. Each visit came with notices, fines, and compliance deadlines measured in days, not weeks or months. Each represented another attack on my operation from a different angle. Sheriff Sheila was mobilizing every department at her disposal to bury me in bureaucracy. I contested each violation through proper channels, filing appeals and requesting hearings. The responses were uniform. All hearings would be scheduled pending availability of the Enforcement Committee, a committee that, conveniently, had not met in 6 months. The local Rose Creek radio station began running hourly news updates about unsafe power generation practices in the county. Though I was never named directly, the descriptions left little doubt about the target. Authorities warned citizens about unpermitted electrical operations that could pose fire hazards and power surges, the broadcaster announced. Sheriff Langston urges residents to report any unauthorized utility services. I was being painted as a dangerous rogue operator rather than what I truly was, a legally permitted farmer providing a needed service. The campaign took its toll. Former friends crossed the street to avoid speaking with me. Businesses that had once welcomed my custom now served me with visible discomfort. I had become toxic by association. The final straw came on a Tuesday morning. I had driven into town to meet with an electrician who had agreed to review my system and provide an independent assessment of its safety. As I parked outside his shop, a sheriff's department cruiser pulled in behind me, blocking my exit. Deputy Michaels approached, accompanied by another officer I did not recognize. "Mr. Harrison," Michaels said formally, "we need to speak with you regarding a reported violation of County Ordinance 47B. "What is Ordinance 47B? "Failure to respond to an official summons." "I never received any summons." The other officer stepped forward. "It was delivered to your residence last Thursday." "No, it was not. I was home all day Thursday." "Are you calling an officer of the county a liar?" The second deputy's hand moved to rest on his belt. "I am saying no summons was delivered to me." "Step out of the vehicle, sir." Deputy Michaels' tone hardened. "Am I under arrest?" "Not yet, but refusing to comply with a lawful order could change that." I exited my truck slowly, hands visible. "This is harassment, and you both know it." What happened next occurred so quickly I barely had time to react. As I turned to close my truck door, a hand grabbed my shoulder and slammed me forward against the vehicle. My face struck the metal frame. Pain exploded across my cheekbone and forehead. "Stop resisting," the second deputy shouted, though I had offered no resistance. "I am not." My protest was cut short as my arm was wrenched behind my back and cold metal handcuffs snapped around my wrists. Blood dripped from my split lip onto the pavement. Passers-by stopped to stare. Through blurred vision, I saw phones recording the incident. Good, I thought, evidence. "James Harrison, you are under arrest for resisting questioning and assaulting an officer," Deputy Michaels announced loudly. "That is absurd. I did not assault anyone. My partner's bodycam will show otherwise." They marched me to their cruiser as a small crowd gathered. Among them was Sheriff Sheila, who had appeared as if summoned by the commotion. She observed the scene with calculated satisfaction. "Taking him in, deputies." "Yes, Sheriff," resisted questioning and struck Deputy Cole. She nodded, her eyes meeting mine. "Process him at the county facility, full booking." As they placed me in the back of the cruiser, I heard the sheriff addressing the onlookers. "This is unfortunately what happens when individuals believe they are above the law. Rest assured, we will always protect the safety of Rose Creek citizens." The county holding facility was cold and smelled of industrial disinfectant. I was photographed, fingerprinted, and placed in a cell with two other men, one sleeping off what appeared to be intoxication, the other staring vacantly at the wall. Hours passed before Deputy Michaels returned. "You are being released pending investigation," he informed me. "Sheriff wants you to know this can all go away if you sign an agreement to cease all power generation activities permanently." "And if I refuse?" "Assault on an officer carries up to 5 years. Your choice." I was released shortly before midnight with no phone and no way home. My truck had been impounded as evidence. The 15-mile walk gave me plenty of time to think about how thoroughly Sheriff Sheila had orchestrated my humiliation. When I finally reached my farm, exhausted and aching, a new shock awaited me. My front door stood ajar, interior lights blazing. Inside, every drawer had been emptied, every cabinet ransacked. My office was in shambles. The hidden container with my evidence was gone from beneath the tool shed. My computer had been smashed, hard drive removed. All my records, all my evidence, vanished. As I surveyed the destruction, my phone rang, a number I did not recognize. "James," a woman's voice, trembling. "This is Carla Winters. You do not know me, but I think we have a common enemy." "Sheriff Sheila," I said. "Yes," her voice dropped to a whisper. "She destroyed my husband's business last year, just like she is doing to you now." "Why are you calling me?" "Because I have been watching, recording, collecting evidence, and I think together we might have a chance of stopping her." For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. A small spark of hope flickered to life. "I am listening." The diner on the outskirts of Riverside County made an ideal meeting place, far enough from Rose Creek to avoid prying eyes, but close enough for easy access. I arrived early, choosing a booth with a clear view of both the entrance and the parking lot. Old habits of caution were becoming second nature. Carla arrived precisely at noon. a thin woman with prematurely gray hair and alert eyes that continuously scanned our surroundings. She slid into the booth across from me, placing a thick manila envelope on the table between us. "I have been building this file for 14 months, she said without preamble. "Ever since Sheriff Sheila fabricated health code violations to shut down my husband's restaurant. The property was seized and sold at auction 3 months later. Guess who bought it? Langston Energy. A subsidiary company. They converted it to office space for their community outreach program." Bitterness edged her voice. "My husband could not take the humiliation. He moved to Idaho to live with his brother. I stayed behind to find justice." She opened the envelope and spread photographs across the table. Sheriff Sheila at various locations around the county, meeting with businessmen, county officials, property developers. Documentation of zoning changes that benefited specific companies. Records of businesses shut down and properties acquired through suspicious means. "You are not the first they targeted," Carla explained, "and you will not be the last unless someone stops them." "What about state authorities?" "I tried, was told it was a local matter requiring substantial evidence of criminal activity." She gestured at her collection. "This is circumstantial, suggestive but not conclusive. We need more." "What about others who have been targeted? Surely there must be more victims willing to speak out." Carla nodded slowly. "There are, but they are scared. Broken. The Langstons do not just take businesses, they destroy reputations, families, lives. People leave town rather than fight back. We need to bring them together." Over the next 2 weeks, Carla introduced me to others who had suffered under Sheriff Sheila's reign. We met in private homes, at roadside diners in neighboring counties, once in the back room of a church under the pretense of a support group. Robert Chen had owned the local hardware store until a sudden reclassification of his inventory storage led to his license being revoked. His property now housed Langston Energy's equipment depot. Eleanor Jessup, a former county clerk, had been dismissed after questioning changes to permit procedures. She now worked at a gas station 50 miles away, but still had copies of documents that had disappeared from official records. Most surprising was Frank Wilson, a former deputy who had served under Sheriff Sheila for 6 months before resigning. "She expected us to enforce her version of the law, not the actual law," he explained during our clandestine meeting. "Those who questioned orders found themselves implicated in misconduct investigations." One by one, we gathered their statements, their evidence, their experiences. Each person's story represented one piece of a larger puzzle, a systematic abuse of power that extended beyond simple corruption into something resembling feudal control of the county. I contacted Samuel Reynolds, an attorney in the state capitol who specialized in government accountability. After reviewing our preliminary evidence, he agreed to meet. "What you have described is concerning," he said, examining our documents. "But proving corruption requires establishing clear quid pro quo relationships or direct evidence of misconduct." "What would constitute such evidence?" "Financial transactions linking Sheriff Langston to businesses benefiting from her actions. Documentation of explicit orders to target specific individuals. Recordings of threats or inducements. Testimony from insiders willing to go on record." We redoubled our efforts, organizing our growing coalition into research teams. Eleanor used her knowledge of county systems to identify questionable transactions. Frank provided insights into department procedures that had been modified under Sheriff Sheila. Robert mapped property acquisitions that followed enforcement actions. Carla proved especially valuable, her meticulous nature perfect for connecting disparate threads into a coherent narrative of corruption. We worked from a rented storage unit converted into an improvised war room, walls covered with timelines, photographs, and connection charts. As our case grew stronger, so did our resolve. What had begun as individual grievances transformed into a collective mission. We were no longer just victims. We were investigators, whistleblowers, advocates for justice. The turning point came when Eleanor discovered references to a county special fund, established 18 months earlier, that received administrative fees from enforcement actions. The fund operated under minimal oversight, with disbursements authorized solely by the sheriff's office. "This could be our smoking gun," Attorney Reynolds said when we presented the finding. "If we can trace these funds to personal benefit for the sheriff or her associates, we have a case the state cannot ignore." Our coalition now numbered 17 former business owners, dismissed county employees, concerned citizens who had witnessed questionable actions. Each brought unique knowledge and perspectives. Each carried personal wounds inflicted by the Langston regime. The danger of our investigation was not lost on us. Sheriff Sheila seemed to possess an uncanny awareness of threats to her authority. We implemented strict security protocols, burner phones, coded messages, rotating meeting locations. Despite our precautions, warning signs appeared. Cars with tinted windows parked outside our homes. Routine traffic stops became more frequent for coalition members. Anonymous calls threatened consequences for stirring up trouble. During a town hall meeting focused on a proposed expansion of Langston Energy's facilities, I attended to gauge public sentiment. Sheriff Sheila noticed my presence immediately. As the meeting concluded, she approached the microphone for what appeared to be an impromptu statement. "I would like to remind all citizens that this county prospers when we respect law and order," she announced, her gaze fixed directly on me. "Those who believe themselves above proper authority often discover the consequences of their arrogance. My office remains vigilant against all threats to public safety and community harmony." The message could not have been clearer. She knew something was building against her, and she was prepared to fight. The question remained whether our fragile coalition could withstand the full force of her retaliation once we moved into the open. As I left the meeting, Carla fell into step beside me, her voice barely audible. "We cannot back down now. Too many lives have been destroyed already." "And more will be if we fail," I acknowledged. "We need to be absolutely certain our case is ironclad before we move." "It will never be completely risk-free," she reminded me. "At some point, we have to be willing to stand up publicly." She was right. Documentation and evidence were crucial, but equally important was the courage to use them. Sheriff Sheila's power depended partly on fear, the belief that resistance was futile and costly. Our growing coalition represented the first serious challenge to that narrative. United, we were stronger than any of us could be alone. United, we had a chance to reclaim our town from those who had corrupted it. That night, I removed the padlock from my generator housing, a small act of defiance, but symbolically important. As the system hummed back to life, lights flickered on across my property, pushing back the darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new risks, but for the first time since this battle began, I was not fighting alone. She was not done with me. She never would be. The flash of blue lights behind my truck that evening told me everything I needed to know. This was retaliation, swift and calculated. "License and registration," the deputy demanded, his hand resting uncomfortably close to his holster. I complied silently, watching his eyes dart nervously toward his radio. "Step out of the vehicle, sir." His voice cracked slightly. This was not routine. "What seems to be the problem, officer?" I asked, keeping my tone level despite the anger bubbling beneath. "We have reason to believe you've been tampering with municipal energy systems." The absurdity of the charge might have made me laugh if not for the cold metal of handcuffs clicking around my wrists moments later. They were charging me with hacking a grid I had spent years working around, not with. The irony was painful. The holding cell smelled of desperation and bleach. I sat on the metal bench, watching shadows crawl across the concrete floor as night settled in. Sleep was impossible. Every sound, keys jangling, doors slamming, sent adrenaline coursing through my veins. This was what Sheriff Sheila wanted, to break me down piece by piece. "You made a serious mistake," she told me when she came to my cell just before midnight. "No deputies around, no witnesses. People who think they can challenge the system always do." I said nothing, meeting her gaze. Her eyes were cold, calculating. "You should worry about what happens to people like you. What happens to their homes when no one is watching them? The threat hung in the air between us. She did not wait for my response before leaving. They released me the next morning on bail, the charges flimsy enough that even the judge seemed embarrassed. But Sheila had accomplished what she wanted. 24 hours was all she needed. I knew something was wrong the moment I turned onto my property. The front door hung slightly ajar, swinging gently in the breeze. My heart sank as I stepped inside. Drawers pulled out, cabinets emptied, my filing system destroyed. The laptop I had used to document everything, smashed beyond repair. They had taken everything, every file, every piece of evidence, the affidavits from other victims, gone. My phone rang. Carla's voice was breathless with panic. There's been a car outside my house all night. Unmarked, tinted windows, I'm scared. Stay inside, I told her. They're watching all of us now. What did they take from you? She asked. Everything, I admitted, surveying the chaos of my living room. Everything we've built. Not everything, she whispered. Remember the backups. A small flame of hope flickered back to life. We had been cautious, prepared for this possibility. 3 sets of everything stored in 3 locations. We're not done, I said firmly. This is not over. That night I sat alone in my ransacked home, the reality settling into my bones. Sheriff Sheila was not merely abusing her power anymore. She had shed the pretense of law enforcement entirely. She was a warlord with a courthouse seal, and we had declared war. But we had something stronger than her badge now. We had the truth, safely stored away. And truth, when finally unleashed, burns hotter than any fire she could bring to our doors. Dawn came with a plan. I called Carla from a payphone outside the gas station, paranoia now a constant companion. We need to move quickly, I told her, before they realize what they missed. The backup files had been our insurance policy, complete duplicates stored on encrypted drives. One at Carla's sister's place 3 towns over. Another in a bank deposit box registered under a different name. Preparations that had seemed excessive now felt like our only lifeline. Carla's voice was steady now, resolve replacing fear. I can reach the state attorney today. My cousin works as a clerk there. Be careful, I warned. No electronic communication, no trails. 2 days later, Carla called from another payphone. It's happening, she said simply. They're sending people. The state investigators arrived with little fanfare. 2 men in unremarkable suits driving an unremarkable sedan. They checked into the motel at the edge of town and began asking questions. Casual at first. Building inspections, permit processes, nothing that would raise alarms. Sheriff Sheila put on her public face, helpful, professional, the model of small-town law enforcement. But those of us watching closely could see the cracks forming. Her smile never reached her eyes. Her hands fidgeted when certain questions arose. I kept my distance, following Carla's updates. The investigators were thorough, methodical. They spoke with business owners, reviewed permits, examined financial records. Sheriff Sheila's kingdom was being mapped, each corrupt connection illuminated under their scrutiny. She knows something is happening, Carla told me over coffee at a diner 2 towns over. We had taken to meeting outside our jurisdiction. I saw her yesterday at the courthouse. She was arguing with someone on the phone. We need to stay hidden, I insisted. Let the state do their work. But an unexpected ally emerged from the shadows 3 days later. Deputy Jensen, young, nervous, and stationed outside my property more than once during this ordeal, appeared at my workshop doorway after hours. His uniform was crisp, but his face betrayed his inner turmoil. Pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool evening. I need to talk to you, he said, glancing over his shoulder. Not here. We drove to an abandoned barn at the edge of my property. Jensen paced, his boots kicking up dust in the fatting light. I can't do this anymore, he finally said, his voice cracking. What she's asking us to do, it's not right. What exactly is she asking? I pressed gently. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small recorder. I've been documenting everything for months. My heart raced as he placed it in my palm. Why are you giving this to me? Because you're the only one who stood up to her, he replied, eyes suddenly clear with purpose. And because I joined the force to protect people, not terrorize them. That night, I listened to hours of recordings. Sheriff Sheila's voice, cold and calculated, directing her deputies to target specific businesses, fabricate violations, plant evidence if necessary, intimidate witnesses, a systematic abuse of power captured in crystal-clear audio. I called Carla immediately. We need to get this to the state investigators, now. Deputy Jensen's career was effectively over. He knew that, but his conscience had finally outweighed his fear. Thank you, I told him as he prepared to leave town the next morning. This changes everything. He nodded, a weight visibly lifted from his shoulders. Make it count, he said simply. The recordings were delivered to the state investigators that afternoon by Carla. Their expressions remained professional, but I could see the shift in their demeanor. What had been a preliminary investigation had just transformed into something much larger. Sheriff Sheila appeared at the diner that evening, scanning the crowd with suspicious eyes. Something had changed in her stance, a new tension, a coiled readiness. She knew the walls were beginning to close in. But she did not know how much we had on her. Not yet. The truth was no longer hidden in shadows. It was marching toward her, backed by state authority and irrefutable evidence. For the first time since this battle began, I slept soundly that night. The tide had turned. The community center had never been so full. Word had spread through hushed phone calls and meaningful glances at the grocery store. Something important was happening, something that could not be missed. I stood at the front of the room, pulse hammering in my throat. Carla had set up the audio equipment, testing it repeatedly to ensure perfect clarity. What we were about to do crossed a line from which there would be no return. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. For months, many of us have suffered under an abuse of power that has torn at the fabric of our community. Eyes shifted nervously toward the doors, as if expecting Sheriff Sheila to burst in at any moment. The fear she had cultivated still hung heavy in the air. Today that changes. Today we hear the truth. I nodded to Carla, who pressed play. Sheriff Sheila's voice filled the room, crystal clear and undeniable. I don't care what the regulations actually say. Find something. Make something up if you have to. I want his generator shut down by the end of the week. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Then another recording played. The Miller's restaurant is next. They're behind on their contributions. Make sure they understand how fire code violations could shut them down indefinitely. Recording after recording filled the stunned silence. Sheriff Sheila ordering intimidation campaigns against business owners, threatening families, demanding silence from witnesses, coordinating with her brother's utility company to target competitors. When the final recording ended, the silence was deafening. Then, from the back of the room, someone began to sob. A floodgate opened. People stood up, one after another, adding their stories. The restaurant owner who lost his license after refusing to pay special inspection fees. The elderly woman whose medication delivery service was shut down for vehicle violations after she complained about power outages. Years of fear and suppression poured out in a cathartic wave of testimony. Martin Chen, our local news anchor who had previously declined to cover the story, approached me afterward. His face was ashen. I had no idea it was this systematic, he said quietly. We'll run the full story tonight. Can you provide copies of those recordings? Within hours, video clips from the meeting were circulating on social media. Martin's news segment played on repeat. Phones throughout town buzzed with notifications as the story spread beyond our borders. The next morning, a crowd gathered outside the sheriff's office. Not with pitchforks and torches, but with signs and determined faces. The fear that had kept them silent had transformed into righteous anger. Sheriff Sheila emerged from her office at noon, flanked by 2 loyal deputies. Her face was a mask of controlled fury as she surveyed the crowd. This is an unauthorized assembly, she announced, her voice carrying less authority than before. Disperse immediately. No one moved. These accusations are fabricated. she continued, a tremor now evident in her voice. A smear campaign by individuals with personal grievances against legitimate law enforcement. From the crowd, an elderly man stepped forward. Mr. Parsons had rarely spoken at town meetings before. His voice now rang clear across the square. "We heard your voice, Sheila. We all heard you, no more lies." The crowd murmured in agreement, pressing closer. It was then that two state police vehicles pulled up, followed by the unmarked car of the state investigators. The crowd parted to let them through. The lead investigator approached Sheriff Sheila, his expression grave. "Sheriff Langston, we need to speak with you immediately." Her face drained of color as she recognized the official documents in his hand. The state attorney stepped forward next, calm and deliberate in his movements. "In light of substantial evidence, we are filing charges of corruption, abuse of power, and conspiracy against you and several members of your department." The crowd fell silent, witnessing justice finally arriving in their town. Sheriff Sheila's eyes found mine across the crowd. The smirk that had haunted me for months was gone, replaced by something I had never seen on her face before: fear. The wheels of justice had begun to turn, slowly but inevitably crushing the corrupt machine she had built around herself. Justice, I learned, does not arrive in a single triumphant moment. It comes in waves, methodical and relentless, washing away corruption bit by bit until nothing remains. The preliminary hearing lasted 3 days. I testified for 6 hours, detailing every interaction, every threat, every illegal action. Carla spoke next, her voice growing stronger with each question. Then came a parade of townspeople, each with their own chapter in Sheriff Sheila's book of abuses. Her badge clinked as it hit the courtroom table after the judge ordered her suspension pending trial. She looked at me once as they led her away, no trace of her former arrogance. Just the hollow stare of someone watching their empire crumble around them. "This is just the beginning," the state prosecutor told me afterward. "Cases like these often trigger a cascade effect." He was right. In the weeks that followed, more victims emerged from neighboring towns. People who had suffered similar abuses at Sheila's hands, whose stories mirrored our own. People who had remained silent out of fear but now found courage in our stand. Lawsuits surfaced from places I had never heard of. Civil cases, criminal complaints, financial investigations. The web of corruption extended far beyond our small town, revealing a network of kickbacks, threats, and power plays that had enriched Sheila and her allies for years. Her brother's utility company faced the harshest spotlight. State regulators descended upon their offices with subpoenas and forensic accountants. The audit revealed price gouging during outages, deliberate service denials to areas with independent power solutions like mine, and financial incentives paid to Sheriff Sheila for eliminating competition. Langston Utilities fined $2.4 million for systemic fraud and anti-competitive practices. Read the headline 6 months into the investigation. I framed that newspaper article and hung it in my workshop. The criminal trial against Sheriff Sheila was scheduled for the following spring. The evidence was overwhelming. Multiple deputies had turned state's witness, trading testimony for reduced sentences. Financial records showed irregular deposits coinciding with business closures. And of course, there were the recordings, hours of incriminating conversations captured by Deputy Jensen's conscience. Through it all, our town began to heal. With Sheila gone, an interim sheriff was appointed from the state police. A quiet, professional woman who seemed genuinely interested in rebuilding trust between law enforcement and the community. One afternoon, a letter arrived bearing the town seal. Inside was a handwritten note from Mayor Roberts. "We failed you," it read. "We failed everyone by remaining silent when we should have spoken up. I hope you can accept this formal apology from the town council and my personal assurance that such abuses will never again be tolerated in our community." It was signed by every council member. The same week, I received official documentation from the State Energy Commission. My generator operation was not only legal, it was now recognized as an essential community resource. The permits came with a commendation for innovative energy solutions in underserved rural areas. With proper authorization, I restored power connections to my original clients and began accepting new ones. The elderly homes that had suffered during Sheila's vendetta were first on my list. Then the diner, the local clinic. One by one, they returned, no longer fearing retribution. "We never should have doubted you," Mrs. Peterson told me as I reinstalled her backup system. Her hands, wrinkled and spotted with age, gripped mine with surprising strength. "But fear does terrible things to people." I understood. Fear had nearly broken our community. Fear had allowed Sheila to rule unchallenged for so long. 9 months after that first confrontation on my property, Sheriff Sheila Langston pleaded guilty to 27 counts of corruption, evidence tampering, witness intimidation, and abuse of power. The plea deal spared us a lengthy trial but guaranteed significant prison time. I was there in the courtroom when she entered her plea. Our eyes met briefly across the room. There was no hatred there anymore, no power struggle, just the quiet acknowledgement between two people that justice, however delayed, had finally arrived. That evening, I stood on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. The hum of my generator provided a comforting background rhythm, a sound that now represented not just electricity, but resistance against corruption. Not just power for homes, but power returned to the people. It was over, almost. A year passed, then two. The seasons changed, and with them our town transformed. The shadow that had hung over us lifted, revealing something unexpected beneath: resilience, community, hope. I walk through the Saturday farmers market now, stopping to chat with vendors and neighbors. Children wave as I pass, some calling me by name. "Generator guy," they say with innocent admiration, unaware of the full story behind the nickname. Their parents know, though. They offer firm handshakes, meaningful nods, quiet words of gratitude. "My grandmother never lost power last winter," a young woman tells me, pressing a jar of homemade preserves into my hands. "Not once, even during the big storm." These are the moments that matter now. Not the victory over corruption, but the peace that followed. The knowledge that grandmothers stay warm, food stays fresh, and medical equipment runs uninterrupted through the night. Carla and I meet for coffee most mornings at the diner, the same diner that once disconnected from my grid out of fear. The owner, Marcus, always greets us with a smile and refuses to let us pay. On the house, he insists, always and forever. We sit by the window, watching the town wake up, and talk about the ones we've helped since. The grocery store owner 2 counties over facing similar intimidation from her local officials. The retirement community dealing with predatory utility practices. Each case different, yet familiar in its patterns of power and abuse. "We've become something of a resource," Carla muses one morning, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "People know they can come to us now." She is right. Word has spread beyond our town borders. People seek us out with their stories, looking for guidance, for hope, for proof that standing up is possible. We listen. We connect them with legal resources. We share what we learned through hard experience. Sometimes I drive past the sheriff's office, now run by a properly elected sheriff who campaigned on transparency and community engagement. The building looks the same, but what happens inside has changed fundamentally. Quarterly public meetings, body cameras, citizen oversight committees, systems put in place to ensure no single person can ever again twist authority into a weapon. Sheriff Sheila serves her sentence in a minimum security prison 3 states away. I hear she works in the prison library now. Sometimes I wonder if she reflects on what she lost, on the damage she caused. I hope she does. Her brother's utility company was dissolved, its assets acquired by a regional cooperative that prioritizes service reliability over profit margins. The power outages that once plagued our community have become rare events rather than regular occurrences. My generator system has expanded, evolving into something larger than I initially imagined. With proper permits and state support, I added more solar capacity, upgraded storage solutions, and improved distribution systems. What began as a personal solution to unreliable power has become a community resource. a model being studied by other rural towns facing similar challenges. On cool evenings, I still sit on my porch and listen to the quiet hum of machinery. The sound reminds me of everything we went through, everything we risked, everything we gained. I never asked for this fight, never wanted to become a symbol of resistance or a community leader. I simply wanted to provide power, literal power, to my neighbors when the system failed them. But when corruption knocked on my door, I found something in myself I did not know existed. Determination, courage, the will to stand against something larger than myself. Now I do more than power homes. I help light up stories that would otherwise remain in darkness. I shine a beam into corners where others still suffer under the weight of corrupt authority. Not as a crusader, but as someone who simply refuses to look away. Last month, a reporter from a national magazine visited to write about our town's transformation. "What would you say to others facing similar situations?" she asked me. I thought carefully before answering. Power does not just flow through lines and circuits, I told her. It flows through people, through communities, and when we decide to generate our own, whether electricity or courage, no one can shut us down. The article was published last week. My phone has been ringing steadily since. I am not just the generator guy anymore. I am a witness to what happens when ordinary people refuse to accept abuse as inevitable, when they connect their individual power to create something stronger, something lasting. If anyone ever tries to take that from us again, we will be ready. Not with weapons or threats, but with truth, with solidarity, with the knowledge that darkness, no matter how long it persists, cannot extinguish the light we create together. That is my promise to this town, to keep the lights on in every sense that matters.